Many years ago, myself and two of my best friends decided to go for a day of mountain biking at Snowshoe in southern West Virginia. Now, this was way before the days of GPS, so we were kinda doing this by some half-assed directions and an old map. But my point is here, we got very lost. Sometime along the way, we ended up in this very tiny little town, and we figured we would ask for directions. It was absolutely deserted. I'm talking not a single soul to be seen anywhere. We parked the truck and split up looking for anyone we could find. Now, this was at around 9 to 10 a.m., so not exactly the ass crack of dawn, mind you. We went into the post office. Nobody. We went into the only bar in town, which was unlocked, unattended with music playing. But again, not a single soul present. We went business to business to business and walked the streets, and after about 25 minutes finally found one old guy who just seemed to appear out of nowhere in the middle of town walking alone. The first question we asked wasn't even for directions. It was, "Where the hell is everyone?" To which he replied, "Well, I guess folks round here don't get up much till round noon." We asked him for directions to Snowshoe, and he pointed to the road we came in on and said to go that way about 10 miles and make a right, and we will find the interstate. We left quickly. We all had a very bad sense of unease about the whole thing. As we left, we were about 5 miles down the road, and we hit a lady dressed up in a state road uniform standing in the middle of a very long straightaway holding a stop sign. When we approached her, she turned the sign from slow to stop. We asked what was going on. She stated that there was road construction up ahead. We told her of what just happened, and she kinda just laughed and said those people in that town are kinda strange, but let it slide. So we actually started talking to her while waiting for a line of traffic to come by from the opposite direction. We actually ended up talking to her for about 45 minutes to an hour, just talking about random things. We kinda got lost in the convo. Not one single vehicle ever approached from the other direction or behind us. Eventually she said, "Well, I guess it's clear now and y'all can go ahead," and slowly turned the sign from stop to slow and motioned for us to go ahead. We went straight ahead, the only direction you could possibly go for the next 30 or some odd miles, and didn't see any signs of construction, state road workers, or maintenance going on at all. She had no vehicle, and we figured she was a flag woman dropped off by some crew up ahead. After the encounter with the town and this woman, we had enough and called it quits. We turned on the interstate as soon as we found it and headed north and home. Every single one of us still remembers this whole encounter in vivid detail to this day. I asked my friend about it actually about 3 months ago at his wedding, and to this day it still freaks him out to no end. None of us know what happened, but it was definitely one of the creepiest, unexplainable experiences we ever experienced. My grandparents had a big farm when I was growing up, and all of the grandkids would help work it over the summer when we were out of school. Anytime we ever saw a rabbit, we were supposed to get it with the hoe or grab the shotgun. I was around 12 or so when I saw a little rabbit in the beans, and I didn't want my grandfather to see it, so I tried to chase it off. I followed it into the brush on the land, and for whatever reason I just kept following it because usually I'd lose the sight of them pretty quickly once they hit the brush. I kept following it until I found what was clearly an old barn ruin. These are pretty normal to happen upon where I'm from, and they're fun to look around inside, so I went in. It was weirdly kept up really well with antique tools in great shape and fresh hay. I worried I had crossed into our neighbor's property, so I hightailed it out of there. I decided to ask my grandfather about it, and he said our land went way far past what I had described, and I couldn't have left our land in the short amount of time that I was gone. So he followed me out there, and we couldn't find it. I checked every single summer I worked there and never found it ever again. It's not that creepy, but it always drove me crazy where the hell that stupid barn went. When my brother and I were 10 and 12 respectively, our family went on a hike through the cemetery and into the woods not too far from our house. My brothers and I would explore these woods every day and even camped in them before. We knew it like the back of our hands. Anyway, as the family hits our usual spot by the creek halfway through, Brother One and I said we'd be back in a few. We wanted to wander off further up the creek, so we did. We came across a very large hill we had never seen before. It was littered with what looked like someone's worldly possessions, as if they'd turned a house upside down, shook out the contents, took the house, and then left. There were tons of painted X's on the trees, showing someone intended to cut them down at some point. We poked around for a few when we thought we heard our mom hollering at us. So we turned tail and walked maybe 20 feet back down the hill to where our parents were. The entire encounter was maybe 45 minutes long on our end. As soon as our mom saw us, we got the beating of a lifetime. We had actually been gone for almost 4 hours. She never saw us walk up any hill and remembered seeing us walking down the straight path by the creek, not turning up a hill that was 20 feet away. She and her husband and our other brother combed the woods for over 4 hours screaming our names and couldn't find us. We pleaded our case and even tried showing her the hill. Surely she was messing with us. So we began to stomp up to the hill and it was gone. It was nowhere to be seen. For years we explored the woods determined to find that hill. As we got older, we mapped it out. To this day, that hill that we were on does not exist. We never found it again. We never found the weird furniture, toys, or clothes and the other house items that were scattered across the hill, and never met anyone in the area that had a clue about the hill. We probably just wandered way further than we meant to, but I always found it weird that we never found the hill ever again. In the 7th grade, I had a friend that lived near a beach on a bay of Lake Michigan. One day in early May, it reached 70 degrees, nearly unheard of for that time of year in northern Wisconsin. My two friends, including the beach friend, excitedly rode our bikes down to the beach to maybe dip our toes in, expecting still frigid waters and then tan for the rest of the afternoon. The water, though, was surprisingly warm, like bath water warm. In this particular area of the bay, the water was shallow for about a half a mile out, and we joyously splashed around, wading deeper and deeper until we were about chest deep. As we dunked each other and swam, I started to feel sick. Bad headache, nausea, and wobbly. Just then, my other two friends mentioned that they also felt sick. We headed back to the shore, nearly crawling by the time we got out. The three of us collapsed under a tree and fell asleep for about 2-ish hours. When we woke up, we talked about how weird it was. I dipped my toe back in the water and it was freezing cold this time. To this day, I have no idea what was in there. I do know that there is a chemical plant in my town that used to manufacture things like Agent Orange, and that their practices were known to be less than environmentally friendly. I have never touched or gone near that water since. I was driving through Illinois to Chicago about a decade ago with a group of friends, and we stopped at a Taco Bell. The first thing we noticed was that the workers were acting very strange. Everything they said was monotone and rehearsed. After sitting in this fairly busy restaurant for a bit, we kind of all just looked at each other at the same time, as we realized that none of the conversations happening around us made any sense. The people were speaking and it was English, but the sentences weren't logical. They were just saying words at each other. We didn't say much about it until we got outside, at which point we were all freaked out and confirming each other's experiences at once, and got the heck out of there. We jokingly refer to that place as the NPC training center, since the people didn't seem to be real, or they were learning how to be human or something. It still to this day freaks me out. By my hometown, there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was around 19 to 20 years old, and we were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there before and had never seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out, even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around, we had noticed it was really clean inside the cave, as it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other small caves did. While we were in there, we got a really eerie feeling after being in there shortly, hearing weird and strange noises. Feeling like we were being touched, poked, and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others. Although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart from one another. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside, and when we entered it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but we have never been able to find this cave ever again. A couple years ago, a buddy and I got turned around on a side road in rural North Missouri. I had no service for GPS and it was pouring rain, so I headed south towards my destination hoping to run into a main highway. We ended up coming into the town of Skidmore, Missouri. It's a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, but there's just something so dark about that place. Infamously in the 80s, a man known as the town bully was killed in broad daylight in the middle of town there. Not one single person spoke about who killed him, and it's never been solved despite many witnesses. There's also been disappearances as well as a brutal crime that happened a few years ago involving a baby being cut out of a woman's womb. Keep in mind, this is a town of only 270 people. As we drove down the main drag, several people gave us a blank but intimidating stare. Completely unnerving. Once we got out of that town, my buddy mentioned that he had a sense of impending doom or danger as we drove through. Weirdly enough, I'd been feeling the same way. I'd never had such a persisting gut feeling of danger like that before. We agreed to never ever go through Skidmore ever again. There's just something seriously evil and dark about that town. It shouldn't exist. Many years ago, my family and I moved from California to Nebraska. I was still a young kid, probably around 5 to 6 years old. We were driving through Nevada and shortly after Las Vegas, and we needed to stop and fuel up for gas. We stopped at your typical old school gas station that rings when you pull up to the pump. I don't remember it that well, but my dad told me it looked normal. He got out to stretch while my mom went inside to pay for gas. My mom said that when she walked in, the gas station had quite a few people inside. When she walked up to the counter to pay for the gas, everyone turned to her and the lights went out. She ran outside where my dad witnessed everything and helped her get into the car, and we sped off down the interstate, not caring whether we ran out of gas or not. To this day, my mom says that's one of her scariest encounters because she can't explain nor figure out exactly what was going on. And yes, we found a better gas station down the road and made it to Nebraska. This story takes place in the mid-90s, a time before widely used cell phones and GPS. My two best friends and I, freshly able to drive, decided we would head out on a Saturday to a water park in southern Missouri, about a 3-hour drive from our home in northwest Arkansas. We had never been before and just used road maps to get there. We had a pretty fantastic time, but as the sun started to reach the tree line, we thought we ought to head home. It's about 7 o'clock and we miss a turn, but my friend Paul, who was navigating, said not to worry. Another turn was coming up that would get us there just as fast. That next turn took us from detoured to completely lost. By 8 o'clock, we were on a road that seemed to be lacking in informative road signs and zero lights. We finally see a gas station and are relieved to get some directions as well as some gas. My friend Taylor and I go inside while Paul pumps the gas. We come inside and a very friendly old man in his early 60s who gives us a very large grin and says, "Well, hello there." He looked like an extreme hillbilly but was very pleasant. We explained that we were needing gas and wanted to fill up. He explained that he was about to shut down for the night but would be happy to oblige us. He then said something I'll never forget. "You have to make haste, though. Tonight is a buffer night." Taylor and I looked at each other and shared an awkward look. We asked him if he could point out our location on the road map. While he was finding it, two people entered the shop from the back and called out for the old man. He said he was up front. The two approached us, a man and a woman, and at first looked confused, then as though hit with an epiphany, they smiled. They asked for the old man. "Are these the guests tonight?" He shot them a look and then said, "No, these are some lost children." I'll never forget the way he said children. It caused the neck on my hairs to stand up. Not sure why. They looked at us and said, "The three of you should make haste because tonight is buffer night." Two things scared the shit out of me right then. The first being, how did they know Paul about pumping gas out front when they came from the back? And the second being that they repeated the old man verbatim. We clarified the directions to get back on a main highway and paid for the gas without waiting for change. Taylor and I booked it out of the gas station to find Paul already in the passenger seat. When we got into the car, we were clearly airborne from the speed we took off. Before we could say anything, Paul told us about how three men from across the street stood under a tree just watching him. He waved at them, but they didn't move a muscle. We just drove as fast as we could until we got back to the highway. To this day, I will still have a nightmare every so often about that gas station and what my imagination has twisted buffer night into being. I was driving in rural areas in New England near the borders of Vermont and Massachusetts, so I'm not sure which one I was in. It was late. Well, so late it was actually early, and there was fog. Dense fog. Like Silent Hill levels of fog. And like an idiot who dies in the opening scene of a horror movie, I am driving on the back roads. First, my headlights just up and goes out. I can't use my high beams because of fog. I am in the middle of nowhere and I haven't seen a house or town in a long time. The car starts making noise and the check engine light comes on. So I pull over. There's nothing much around besides field and fog. It's creepy as hell. I gamely look at the engine. I can fix electronics, but not engines. I tighten up all the things I know. The car now won't start, so I'm in the dark in the middle of nowhere on the side of the road. Because of the natural rule of how things work, my cell phone has no service as well. It's like one big horror movie cliche. But I'm not stupid enough to go wandering the roads right now. So I recline my seat and decide to take a nap for a couple of hours until the sun comes up. I wake up. The sun is coming up, the fog is going away, and I'm in on the main street of a tiny town, parked in front of what looks like the Bates Motel house. There's houses everywhere. It was the creepiest feeling. I was sure I was off in the woods. There was not a light on in any house all night. There was a service station 50 yards up the road. I walked up to it, talked to the guy, and he walked over to look at the car, asked me to try to start it, and it did. The car turned over right away and both headlights were working. I drove on, never got the name of the little village, and I couldn't find it on a map. I always felt like I was in this big setup for a horror movie that just didn't pan out. I don't know what happened, but it's one of the most unexplainable experiences that ever happened to me. A group of friends and I decided to take a small Saturday afternoon road trip into the back country of South Carolina. We figured we'd just drive around, head southwest, and see if we could find some antique shops, cemeteries, and abandoned buildings and the like. It's about an hour of nothing, just some light conversation and southern pine forests. We pass a few horse farms, some quaint old mill towns, and a few gas stations, but nothing interesting yet. 2 p.m. rolls around and we decide we wanted to get something to eat. As a rule, we always like to try local diners and restaurants, so we kept driving until we saw a faded road sign for a town. It was about 5 miles down the road and we figured that's good enough. As we're driving through the town, we notice there's no one out. No cars on the road, no people on the streets, and no real houses. The streets are lined with abandoned and boarded up warehouses, shops with broken windows, and a few broken down cars from the 90s. The further we go, the worse it gets. We finally get to a diner that's right off their main street. It looks like there's about 10 people eating inside, and there's a few cars in the parking lot. Seems like they're open. Here's where it starts to get weird. We open the door and step in. As soon as we clear the threshold, everyone looks at us. It's like in the movies where the record scratches on the jukebox and everyone looks, except far more uncomfortable. In the middle of the diner is a large table with about 6 people around it who all turn back to their food and start whisper talking. The waitress nervously shuffles up to us and quietly asks us how many. My friend Chris takes the lead and says 4, in just a normal speaking voice. Everyone continues to look at us and the waitress recoils but takes us back to our table. She sat us in a basic 4-top near the large table in the middle. She takes our drink orders and leaves. Once she leaves, we all whisper about how weird that was. While we're talking, the line cook is just staring at us with this violent look in his eyes. We all figure out what we want and wait. We sit in awkward silence for about 10 minutes before the waitress comes back. She takes our orders and disappears into the back of the diner, leaving us alone in the dining room with the people at the other table. It gives us some time to look them over. They're your typical basic Southern family. Chubby, haggard-looking wife, husband with sun-leathered skin and oil stains on his coveralls. 3 children, all girls, all in nice Sunday dresses. And then her. The other woman was dressed like the other girls but looked very much in her 40s. She wore a red paisley patterned dress with frilled lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was long and stringy and covered the bulk of her round face. The left of her was a doll, seated in a high chair for babies. The woman would sometimes lean in towards the doll and whisper something, then giggle. Soon the waitress dropped food off at their table but set a meal down for the doll as well. She commented on how pretty the woman's daughter was and left. About 10 minutes later, she came back with our food, silently left it, and gave us the side eye, and walked away. The waitress came back to refill the other table's water, where she asked everyone how the food was, but asked the doll too. When she asked the doll, she spoke in a baby voice. The woman then picked up the doll, held it in front of her face, and spoke in a little girl's voice. She was being the doll. My other friend looked at me with the most terrified, wide-eyed expression. She worked with disturbed children as a therapist in a court-mandated facility. We shoveled our mediocre food down, and my friend Chris just dumped $40 on the table, and we left. As we were leaving the town, Chris was trying to look to see if he could find the name of the town. I was checking to make sure we weren't being followed. This happened about 6 years ago, and we still can't figure out the name of that town or where it is. No one remembers the name or the road it was off of, but we remember being there and what the diner looked like. Definitely one of the most creepy experiences I ever went through. I've been living out of my car sometimes. There's a stretch of road in the southwest that runs along national forests. One night I was looking for a good dark pull-off to sleep in. I found a good one. It had trees to pull under so the headlights out of the 2-lane wouldn't be as disturbing, as it has truck traffic. In the morning I heard a car pull off and watched it as it went on past me into the forest on a 2-track. I hadn't seen that lane when it was dark. It looked inviting. I decided to try driving on it myself. It turned out to be a lovely area, and eventually I found a really nice spot under some trees out there where it was very quiet, and I could see the Milky Way at night, although it was sub-zero most nights. I stayed out there for several days. Data service was good, so I kept applying, and during that time I got an interview invitation. The first time in a long time. They called while I was sitting under those trees. The guy who called had later told me that I sounded very relaxed. Heartened by that call, I drove out to the highway to get some groceries and water. When I came back up the highway, I could not find the original entry point. I found another 2-track and eventually got back to the same spot, but that lane had no place to pull off and park. Months later, I took a temporary house about 40 miles from there and sometimes still use that stretch of highway. I look carefully every time I pass through, sometimes irritating other drivers. I have not yet found the original entry. None of the pull-offs have a lane at the back or even a break in the fence, and none of the lanes have even a slight white spot, much less a deep place with trees. I am not that kind of person at all, which is why I re-examine that stretch every time I pass through. But I'm slowly resigning myself to having spent at least one night in a place that doesn't currently exist. There was a group of us camping at a big state park with a bunch of horses. We had more people than horses, so my best friend and I go riding out. It was just the two of us. We then came back and switched out for the larger group to go. At the time, we were in our early 20s while everyone else on the trip is 30 to 40s. They had made a bunch of jokes when we left about not getting lost, because it got dark really fast and we were in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. Which means, of course, when they go out, they got lost. To make a long story short, one of the women forgot to mention she was on a few new medications and convinced the rest of the group to follow her down a steep deer trail. A different rider had surgery in a green horse and had to bail off. And this all accumulated with them calling us to come save them in the dark in the middle of nowhere. They originally wanted us to bring a horse trailer, but neither of us have driven one before, and the ones we had were massive, so we take a car and go try and hunt them down. They said they'd found a road and dropped a pin in it on Google Maps, so off we went. The road was hidden off of a highway. By now it's pitch black outside and we can only see a few feet ahead of us. The road immediately turns to gravel and starts to shrink in size the more we go down it. Then it starts to go up and down increasingly steep hills. The whole time we're joking and laughing until we run across a house. It's one of those farmhouses you know shouldn't be inhabited because it looks like it's about to fall over. It's got barbed wire and other crap all over the lawn, and a dark figure watching us from the porch the closer we approach. It could have been a person, and it probably was a person. But like I said, it was dark. We managed to find our people, turn the car around, and get whoever needs to be in the car in it. My friend and I take turns between driving and leading horses with the car in front of it going slow because it was steep. The horses are tired and misbehaving. The riders are all upset at one another, and we know we're going to have to take this whole parade on the highway in the dark because it's the only way back to camp. I never mentioned this to anyone else, but on the way back, the house was no longer there. So I have no idea what the hell it was that I saw, but I know it was there before. My brother is 7 years older than me, so when I was 9 to 10, he was in high school and had to hide from our parents that he smoked and dipped tobacco. As a result, most days of the week after he got home from school, we'd go out into the woods for about an hour or so. We lived way out in the country in an already rural part of East Texas, so there were plenty of woods to explore. The land south of our house was all owned by a mining company, and my parents didn't want us going out there, so we always crossed a fence to the north of our house and explored the woods out there. Very likely some locals' property that we had no business being on. But when you live out in the country, you figure you'll have plenty of signs before you accidentally walk into someone's backyard. After a few months of venturing out in this area, never traveling more than an hour's distance from our house and always in the daylight, we decided one day we'd just keep walking and walking. My brother smoked and spit into a Dr. Pepper bottle. We entered big pastures and dove back into even deeper woods. Whenever we've talked about it, we've always said that we must have traveled at least a mile. Eventually, we came across a circular pond I distinctly remember having a much higher rim on one side. My brother explained that this was because a tractor had dug it out and piled up more dirt on one side than the others. We kept going past the pond and entered another patch of woods. As we came out, we saw that the tree line curved around sharply to the right, and the clearing we now stood in opened up far wider. We went in that direction, and while my memory of getting there is a little hazy, I know we suddenly came across a very large white building surrounded by a high fence. There was a gate large enough for vehicles to move in and out, and a dirt roading leading away from the facility. We could hear the sounds of activity and we could see people walking around the outside of the fence near the gate. I'm afraid any other detail I could give at this point might be colored or false memory or exaggerations from an imaginative young brain, so I'll talk to my brother about it some more before I go any further. At that moment, we both felt the spine-tingling terror alerting the body that something about this was very wrong. We were not supposed to be here. We were at the very least going to get into some serious trouble. We were standing in the middle of a clearing gawking at a facility of some kind on what was obviously someone else's property, and we were seeing something deep out in the woods that we had never known was there. All this time we'd spent walking around these woods, if we'd just gone a ways further, we would have stumbled across this. I remember standing out there for a moment longer asking my brother what this could possibly be. He told me something along the lines of, "Dude, I have no clue, but we really need to get the heck out of here." The tone of his voice truly freaked me out, and I remember running back hard the way we came, crossing the same pond and cutting a path as soon as possible to the route we had traveled. When we finally stopped out of breath, my brother told me that in no way, shape, or form would I utter a word of this to our parents. They were spankers and awful grounders, so he knew the trouble he'd be in for taking his little brother into what was quite possibly a very dangerous place. After that day, we kept going out in those woods, but never that far. Eventually, my brother got caught with a can of Skull, and my dad made him eat the whole can and puke it up on the porch. Being an easily intimidated little kid, it wasn't very hard to get more information out of me about my brother's smoking and dipping habits, but I never once brought up the facility we'd found out in the woods. Over the years, my brother and I have brought this story up many times. Our parents have gotten way laxer since we've all grown up, and we even told them this story. We've added a lot of other weird ones to our arsenal in the time since, as our family has always lived by huge areas of land for us to wander around on, but this is one of our favorites. It's always, remember the time we almost got killed by those government researchers? Remember the time we found that crazy building in the woods with those people walking around it? But for the past few days, this event has really been bugging me. I told my wife about it in detail and she was pretty amused. I thought I'd look around in Google Maps a little bit at the area we grew up in. Something I'm honestly surprised I've never done for these specific reasons before. And what I found, or should I say haven't found, is really bizarre. Moving north from my old house on Google Maps, I can fairly clearly make out the woods we spent our time in. When I go further north, I can see several large clearings followed by more wooded areas. Eventually, I even found the circular pond, and I'm positive I can make out the higher end of the pond that we stood on as my brother explained how it had been made. When I drag the map further, I can see what looks to be the clearing on the sharp curve of the tree line to where we saw the facility, but there's nothing there. No trace of a building and no evidence of a dirt road leading away from an old structure. It's just pasture and more trees. In fact, when I zoom out and look at the whole area, it doesn't seem possible for there to have been an operation of the scale that we saw out there at all. Just a little ways further north, the land becomes nothing but pasture with houses pressed up against a country road. For people to have come and gone from this area, they would have had to have a road of some kind, as well as power lines stretched out to the building. But there's nothing like that on Google. In fact, there's really no "here it was" spot on the map at all. It's like it was never there to begin with. It's been a few years since we've talked about it, so I texted my brother earlier today to ask him if he still remembered this happening. He called me immediately after and said, "Yeah, man, that was a really weird day. You know how good I used to be in the woods, but that really freaked me out. We had to get out of there. This entire event feels more and more like something that we walked into that we shouldn't have seen." I still remember the feeling of dread upon finding the place and knowing that something bad would happen if we stuck around. I'm going to try and send my brother this post later so he can read it and corroborate, as well as look at the Google Maps for himself to see if he sees anything different. I just don't understand what we saw and why it isn't there anymore. It just doesn't make any sense. A few years ago, I was driving home from Florida to Pennsylvania with 3 of my friends. It was late, probably sometime between 1 to 3 a.m., and we were somewhere in North Carolina. We needed to get gas really soon, so we agreed to take the next exit off the highway that had a gas station. The second I took the exit, it was pitch black. There were no headlights along the exit ramp or on the roads up ahead. The only lights in the area came from my headlights and the lights from 95 behind us. The sheer darkness was enough to creep me out, but we really needed gas, so we pressed on. While driving to the gas station, the only building we saw was a massive, old-looking church. We drove by a sign informing us that we were in a town, but there was no businesses or houses other than the church. When we finally got to the gas station, we saw an assortment of giant farm animal statues outside the building, standing tall and barely illuminated. They weren't fenced off, and there were no signs explaining why they were there, so if it's considered an attraction, it's a confusing one at best. However, the weirdest thing happened inside the gas station. With me on this trip was one other girl and two guys. We had all been friends for years, and our dynamic includes making fun of each other a lot, but never deliberately messing with each other's heads. At this point in our trip, we were all tired and eager to get home. The gas station itself was huge on the inside, filled to the brim with shelves, all of which were jam-packed with an assortment of junk food and junk items. In hindsight, this seems weird given how empty the town was, but at the time we were all distracted by just how much stuff was in this gas station. The other girl and I went to the restroom while the two guys paid for gas. The restroom was hard to get to as there were boxes piled just outside the door, and the sign just had a piece of paper with women scrawled across it in a green highlighter. Upon leaving the restroom, we saw one of our friends entering the men's restroom, which was also marked by a piece of paper with men written in highlighter. He gave us a weird look as he entered, but we shrugged it off and walked towards our other friend, who we could see standing at a shelf a bit away. He was facing away from us, and as we approached, I started to get a bad feeling in my stomach. As we got closer, he turned and gave us the most sinister look I've ever seen. Alarm bells are going off in my head at this point, and my female friend and I proceed to the car, unsure of what to make of the interaction we just had. The second we stepped outside and looked towards the gas pumps, we saw the same two friends we had just seen standing behind us. The one who was entering the bathroom was leaning casually against the car, while the other one who gave us a sinister look was finishing up pumping gas. My female friend and I were dumbfounded and asked them how they were standing in front of us when they were just both behind us just a few seconds ago, and they just looked at us like we were insane. After paying for the gas, the two immediately went back out to the car as the gas station gave off too weird of a vibe to wait in there for us. Sufficiently creeped out, we piled back in the car and noped the heck out of there. I'm not sure why we saw two of my friends' doppelgangers in a gas station or why the doppelgangers seemed to be in such a pissy mood. And I'm not sure why the gas station had a collection of farm animal statues outside of it. I'm pretty content never going there again though. That place definitely shouldn't exist.